Guys, okay. This poem supposed to have digested it in college and failed miserably. I had a fun, quick little story. A girlfriend. I had one girlfriend in college. She sent me some lines of this poem. I thought I knew what they meant, um, but I didn't. It took a lot for me to get to the bottom of what's going on here. A lot of studying. It wasn't until I became an English teacher that. So I'm saying all this because this is difficult poetry, very, very high level stuff that um, represents a really interesting time period in British literature and the kind of poetry that they were creating back then. Now, um, in order for us to even get close to understanding what's going on in this poem, I want to introduce to you an idea that goes all the way back to the ideas of ancient Greece. A philosopher by the name of Plato. Let me bring up an image real quick here. Okay, so our buddy Plato, I think this image is helpful. This is a metaphor. And we remember also the allegory of the cave. Um, I think we talked about that. So he's somebody that likes to explain abstract philosophical concepts, but he uses symbols and imagery in order to do that. And here, in this one dialogue called the Phaedrus, which is tremendous, I hope you read it someday. We don't have time to get into it, but some of the ideas I can explain to you. You know, if you are someone who wants to live what Socrates called the examined life, if you want to discover your full humanity, your reason for being, the meaning of existence, you got to understand what it is that we are dealing with when it comes to our lives. And he brings in this concept of the soul, which means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And in the Phaedrus, the soul, here it's represented by this chariot driver. And here we have the horses that are pulling the chariot. So what happens is that we are, to some extent, as humans, there's a little bit of a conflict between what our mind and our body is up to and what the harmony and the pure essence of our being, which is the soul. What is our highest nature is connected with the soul, and oftentimes our soul has to be the governing force over the mind and the body, which can lead to terrible things. Or just the messiness of civilization. Fights, wars, arguments, disagreements. Horrible, corrupt politics. Corruption in general was a big theme in Plato's dialogues, and so here he is trying to explain, well, how do we curb or try to govern ourselves in the best way? Well, we have to try to align ourselves with the soul. How do we do that? That's a big question. But the first step is recognizing that we do have a soul and that it is connected to something sort of beyond the corporeal, something beyond the physical plane. For example, parallel lines don't exist in reality, but in our abstract thinking, we can conceive of a perfect circle or parallel lines. Even the idea of perfection, it's not something we see with our senses, but it's something we have a concept of. those were all clues for Plato that we have a higher nature and that our soul is what contains that. And so if you're a philosopher and on your journey as a philosopher, you are going to want to link and harmonize and tame the mind and body with the soul. That's a very reduced explanation, but I think that's going to serve our purpose. Let me bring up another image here. Okay. Head, shoulders, knees and toes, knees and toes. Okay. Not the most intricate image, but I wanted to talk about hierarchies and connect this to what Plato talked about in terms of the soul and the instincts. And, in class today we talked a lot about Adam and Eve and the way that some Christian doctrine attempts to do a little bit of a splitting off of our brain, our reasoning, our high, what they call our higher functioning, the highest part of ourselves is our brain and our reason, and that's how we connect with God, and that our body, our appetites, our desires are just inherently stained, and the doctrine of original sin, which is explained in the myth of Adam and Eve, which we talked about. That's the explanation for why we can't trust our bodies and our instinct. I feel like, and I just want to make, you might have some questions about what I was saying about Plato. I'm a little bit nicer to Plato because I feel his view of the soul and the different parts of the body, he definitely envisions the potential for man to be more holistic and more not necessarily divided, but harmonized. And with Christian doctrine, at some point, it's as if the church agreed on this idea that no, we're always going to be broken, and that's why we need religion and Christ and the church, and that's the only way we can become unbroken. That's a little bit harder for me to accept. I think Plato, again, is more holistic. All right, so eventually we're trying to talk about John Donne, the poem that I had up a minute ago. But I want to refer to this idea of the soul, though, because in John Donne's era, he was a lover, a poet, but he was also a priest, and he knew his doctrine. And he explored the idea of relationships, and he extended this idea of this higher spiritual ordering of humanity. I don't know if that even made sense, but this idea that humans have a potential to love in a way that is pure and not stained by everything that's below the neck. Okay, that we can sometimes transcend our inherent original sin if we love in a completely soulful way, which ultimately is what God intended. God wants us to love. God wants us to connect with one another, but we have to do that in a particular way where our passions and our instincts don't rule over us and stain or make our love baser and impure. Again, you can already hear this hierarchical ordering of human experience and the world and the universe creeping into this philosophy. But that's what was current at the time. I'm going to pause for a second here. How did I do this last time? Escape, yeah. Okay, back here, and again, an image really easy to find is searching the great chain of being. This is connected with somebody else's project, but I think this is useful for my purposes because you notice that, okay, we have some animals included in here, even elements, plant life, okay, so, but at the top we've got God, and then underneath that angels, etc., and then the heavenly bodies. So here is this the total universe here that we're dealing with here, with God, the main governing principle, and that somehow because of their elevated nature, the celestial bodies, referred to as the heavens, they're somehow connected and close to God. And then you got the moon, the king, the church, princes, etc., nobles, people. For John Donne, though, if we are aligned spiritually in a way in which our focus is on the heavenly and the eternal, the timeless. Okay, God exists in a realm that is omnipresent, and he's omniscient, all-knowing. The soul that God gave us is the gateway to a little piece of that immortality, of that timelessness. Okay, within us, yes, we have this stained, kind of corrupt, impure body, but according to Donne's universe, our reason, our soul, our spirituality helps us to transcend from this, from the baser levels, and to somehow inhabit a higher plane of existence. Now, he relates this to relationships in a very, very neat way, which at the time had to have been, it was brilliant, it was genius. And I want to look at that in the language of the poem. And before I do that, just note moon here, okay? Moon is listed in this hierarchy. So there are things which are above the moon and things that are below the moon. And so almost like the moon is like that one boundary point where the king is right there up against it. And one step up, you're almost in the heavenly sphere or the heavenly circle. I'm going to pause for a second here. Okay, now we're back to the poem, and I want to read this first stanza here. As virtuous men pass mildly away, okay, as so should trip you off to, we got a simile here. Okay, so he's comparing virtuous men passing mildly away. He's talking about a man, virtuous men, meaning they're dying mildly, meaning they die without conflict because they've been virtuous. They're at peace. They're going to heaven. And they imagine a virtuous, pious, spiritual man dying, saying to himself, whispering to his soul, go soul, go join the heavens. Okay? This is a peaceful moment. This is the fulfillment of your destiny. You've spent your time in the world and now you've been called up to heaven. It should be something that is peaceful, mild, pleasant, maybe. Okay, but John Donne points out that the human reaction is to respond to this, while some of their friends do say, now his breath goes. And some say, no, we don't want to lose you. Stay here with us. Okay, we have a reaction of pain when we see somebody departing from this realm. Okay, what is he comparing that to? We got to read further. He's making a point here. He's setting up an image here. Okay, similarly contrasts two unlike things. So he's describing this phenomenon of dying peacefully and letting your soul go without a fight. Some people might see that and go, no, don't die, we're going to miss you, oh, it's painful. But some people might say, oh, there his breath goes. He's at peace, he's going to heaven. He's comparing the death experience in that manner to a valediction or a departure. That's what valediction means, a saying goodbye. So he's saying goodbye to his beloved, and he's saying, let's not react the way that some people do who say no to death. Let us melt and make no noise. Melt, make, mildly, a lot of alliteration there. Wonder what we can make of that. So let us melt, make no noise, no tears flood, nor sigh tempests move. Great language here, tear floods, comparing crying to a flood that's hyperbolic, sigh tempests, a storm of sighs, like, or even like when you cry so much, it's like, okay, he's saying, if we do that, if we are allow ourselves to be governed by these emotions, this is going to be a profanation of our joys. To tell the laity our love. Okay, if we make a big scene at our departure here, okay, if we talk about, if we let out these baser emotions and let our pain fly free and we have sigh tempests and crying and blubbering and all that stuff, we're letting the world know about what's our private thing that is spiritual and pure. We don't want to profane that. So that's what's going on in these first, there's a neat simile in these first two stanzas. Okay, back from lunch break. It's been a lot getting through stanzas 1 and 2. But if you've got the concept he's set up here and the way he's going to talk more about this idea of soulful love rather than, well, he contrasts that to sublunary love. And I'm going to explain that in a few minutes, or here, right now. So let's look, he kind of makes a strange jump. Here he is talking about dead people dying. Here he mentions this goodbye in stanza 2, and how if we let our emotions and our crying and all of that, that's going to actually just sort of debase or devalue the spiritual aspect of our love. And then here in the third stanza, he talks more about stuff that you can only understand if you are looking at this model of the hierarchical chain of being, the way that they ordered the universe back then. All right, so I wanted to bring this image back here. He says, moving of the earth. That's called an ellipses when you join together two words like that. Moving of the earth brings harms and fears. Okay, what's he talking about? I'm pretty sure what he's mentioning is like an earthquake phenomenon. So he's saying, yeah, when there's an earthquake, there's discernible harm, and it's scary. And men don't understand it. Men reckon what it did and meant. Of course, women probably are troubled by other things that the weaker sex is preoccupied with. Throwing a little shade at the time period here. But nonetheless, we could say humans or people are going to wonder what an earthquake is about. Okay, and that's happening on this earthly plane. And I'm referring down here to this chain of being, where, okay, so you've got the moon here, and man sort of lives in this realm. Okay, so an earthquake is going to be something that's happening in the lower realms. Therefore, ultimately, in the grand scheme, it's not part of that which is spiritual and heavenly and timeless. It's something that's temporal, meaning it's impermanent. So he says, in contrast to an earthquake, which happens sort of on this level, we see it, we perceive it, we feel it, we're afraid of it, we react to it. But guess what? There's other stuff happening in the universe that is much more important, much more powerful, but we don't even recognize it. It's in a way, it's innocent. It's unrecognized. It's out of awareness in a sense. What is that phenomenon? He's talking about the trepidation of the spheres, and trepidation is the sense of the word trepidation here is. Oh, I lost my thing. Like a motion, or like a trembling, or so that the idea that there was this ancient idea that the spheres, meaning the heavenly bodies, the stars, especially the planets, the moon, they're doing their circling around, and that they thought that there was some sort of harmonic sound produced by the what they call the music of the spheres. So he's saying that the movement of the celestial bodies, the spheres, it's way more significant and important than a simple earthquake. Yet people pay attention to the earthquake and they get all wrapped up in that when they don't realize how much more divine and amazing and subtle even are the movement of the celestial bodies. Okay, John Donne. I think we're with you here so far. Wow, this is only 3 stanzas. So you can see why I would have had a difficult time getting through this in college without the right support. You know, it's hard to interpret all this stuff. All right, let's go to the 4th paragraph. Wonderful sounds going on. Lots of repetitive consonants and alliteration and assonance here. Dull, sublunary lovers love. Let's say that a few times. Dull, sublunary lovers love, whose soul is sense. I gotta pause here. Looking right here, these 1.5 lines. If sublunary lovers who are not connected in a soulful way. In fact, he says their soul is sense, and what he's talking about is the senses. And what do we know about the senses in terms of this cosmic hierarchy? Okay, the only pure sense that we have is our reason and our rationale that's connected to the spiritual realm and to God. Okay, all the other senses, okay, the pleasure, pain, disgust, anger, all of these things that are quite instinctual and quite natural. Okay, but he's saying, though, that this kind of sense is what is the basis of some kinds of love. I think one way of putting it is sublunary lovers whose soul is sense. Another way we might phrase it is that people who are in lust, and the soul of that love isn't really soulful at all, it's just based on feelings and passions, and there's not really any eternal, redemptive, spiritual quality to it. Hope you're following me on that. So he has something to say about this kind of love. He says that if you are loving in that type of way, you cannot admit of absence, as in saying goodbye. Remember, this is a valediction forbidding mourning, okay? A valediction is a goodbye in which the speaker is saying, look, you can't be upset about the goodbye. So if you are one of these dull sublunary lovers, loving, okay, and if your soul is sense, okay, it's not made up of the higher elements of the universe, you can't stand absence. You can't stand a goodbye, because then you aren't able to connect through the senses anymore. Okay, proximity is what creates the touching, the connecting. Absence means that's gone and lost, therefore you feel the loss and you're going to cry. But guess what? All of those things are governed by emotions. It's sublunary, it's not high and spiritual. He contrasts sublunary lovers then to his love, what he claims to be the kind of love he has with his beloved. He says, but we by a love so much refined that ourselves know not what it is. Refined meaning our love is of the stuff of the stars, okay? It's a soulful love. We don't even really know what it is, but through our reason and through our alignment with the will of God, we can get intimations of the incomprehensible. Assured of the mind. Okay, that's what that means. We don't know what it is, but if we are oriented properly, there is an assuredness. And if we are oriented in this kind of way, we don't care so much about the physicality of the love. We care less eyes, lips, and hands to miss. So another way of putting it is, because our love is so spiritually refined, all of that passionate, corporeal, lustful stuff, okay, the physicality of love, sex even, kissing, holding hands, we're not going to miss that, because that's not what our love is based on. So what happens when two people who are so dang spiritual are so connected in this way? This is where he really goes into some interesting work as a poet, making some cool comparisons. Our two souls, therefore, which are one. So he's saying automatically, because our love is so spiritual, we are connected and joined and made into one. Okay, so there's something about two people stretching up into the celestial realm, and the souls intermingle and become eternal together. It's a very idealized idea of love, that if our souls are connected, they become one, and they become joined. So, though I must go, I'm about to leave. In fact, John Donne was about to go down to Europe and leave his wife. And there's some, the irony of all of this is that he did have extramarital affairs. So explain that, Mr. Donne, or Dr. Donne, or whatever. That little footnote aside, I still respect the complexity of his argument and of his poetry here too. Nobody's perfect. So he's about to go, but he says, endure not yet a breach, but an expansion, like gold to aery thinness beat. Okay, this is beautiful if you know what he's talking about. He's saying, I'm leaving, we're apart, but we're not separate because our souls, which have been joined, imagine like this cloud that just sort of expands. Okay, so if I go over here and you're over here, what's happening is our souls, which have been unified, become even more expanded and more airy. And he compares that expansion of two souls in one. He makes a really wonderful comparison. I've got to pause right now so I can bring up a video to show you. Oh no, what happened to everything? All right, there's lots of videos out there that depict this process. And so you study chemistry, and you know that gold is kind of unique in its conductivity and its malleability, and you can squish the element of gold almost to like one atom's thinness. And so notice this machine he's using here. He's got all the paper in there, and he beats it down and it spreads it out. And that process gets repeated. Another way you can see that is through one of these rolling machines in which they run it through here, it squishes it. There we go. And then you get these little squares that they cut off, and then they pound that out. And they beat it down, and it becomes super, super thin. Let's see. Yeah, there's a good example there. The sizes. Let's see what we get at the end. Yeah, they have to, it's so, look how thin that gold is, okay? Airy thinness. It's been beaten down to airy thinness. You could like blow it. It's like a tissue. It's so thin, but it's gold at the same time. Pretty cool stuff. So here John Donne is taking that idea of the malleability of gold and how when it has this ability to expand into airy thinness. And he's comparing that expansion to the way that their souls together as one expand when he leaves and goes off to Europe. He's in England at the time. Okay, and then we get another cool comparison. I swear I've got this thing I gotta find here. Oh, here it is. The compass. Okay, let's talk about this. He's talking about their two souls. And then he says, well, okay, if you want to make the argument that they be two souls, well, they are still joined and inseparable and even that much more special through their unification. And he's going to use another way of describing the joining of their two souls, not skulls, talking about how they're like a compass, okay, where you have two legs of a compass, one and feet, I guess. One foot does the drawing, one does the standing still. It's a very sharp one, actually. So he says, thy soul, as in his beloved soul, is the fixed foot, and it makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. So it doesn't look like it's going to move, but when the other one moves, it's going to lean and follow it along. This conceit, this extended metaphor continues as he says, and though it in the center, so her soul being this one, sits in the center, yet when the other far doth roam, so here's the other one going around and roaming around, it leans, the center one leans and hearkens after it and grows erect as that comes home. So there we got a very interesting extended metaphor using a compass to describe how there are two souls joined and how the distance only enhances their essence. And then he wraps it up here in the last stanza and says, "Such wilt thou be to me." Okay, you're going to be like this fixed foot of the compass. And this is the part that my girlfriend sent to me when I went away for the summer. And I never quite I thought it was all nice and romantic when she sent me those lines, but I didn't know what they really meant until later on. Anyhow, so such wilt thou be to me, who must, like the other foot, obliquely run. Thy firmness makes my circle just. So because she stands firm, the circle becomes just or perfect or, true in the sense of it being a circle that has that radius that is consistent throughout the entire. My geometrical terminology is escaping me right now. But thy firmness makes my circle just and makes me end where I've begun. So there you have a valediction forbidding mourning. I hope that made some sense to you guys. Thank you for sticking out the full 30 minutes or so. But it takes time to unpack some of this stuff. And so thanks for listening.